Hey, you're listening to the Start Something podcast, where we take you behind the scenes of the founder journey, breaking down what it takes and how it can change your life. My name is Bailey.
And my name is Shruti, and today we're going to be talking all things boundaries. That means founder boundaries, that means personal boundaries, that means Bailey and Shruti boundaries, it means anything and everything boundaries.
Yeah, so I love that we need to have a conversation about boundaries, so we're just recording it live. We haven't had any issues, I just want to put it out there, but
this is a fight.
Actually, wait a second.
Should we fight?
I'm wondering, have we had problems that I don't know about? Stay tuned. Stay tuned to find out. But no, in terms of boundaries, I just feel like the need for boundaries is just it is so high. We need boundaries so badly, but it takes so long sometimes to learn how to develop those boundaries effectively, and also to recognize that we can draw boundaries in the first place.
Yeah.
I know for me, whether it's drawing boundaries with potential investors or customers or anyone relating to our business, or like you said, boundaries with friends and family, etc. Learning how to draw those boundaries and learning that it's okay to draw those boundaries is so important, and it's not always easy. So I'm really glad that we're gonna unpack this a little bit, and I'd love to turn it over to you to ask, can you share a little bit about the role that drawing boundaries has played in your life and what you think about the power of saying no?
Yeah, great question, first of all. For me, it's interesting, you might relate to this, Bailey, but I'm actually such a people pleaser. So I've been on such a journey to learn to say no to someone, whether it's, a good friend of mine being like, hey, can we go for drinks tonight, for example, when I don't want to drink, as simple as that, to a customer saying, hey, can you build XYZ features by tomorrow? And actually saying no to a customer is a really hard thing to do because they're paying for your tool, right? So literally in my day-to-day, or even if I see, honestly, candy, because I'm low-key a sugar addict, like, how do I say no to what's right in front of me and just listen to what my stomach is actually craving, which is just water at the end of the day, or something very simple, right? So I've struggled with people pleasing and setting boundaries pretty much my whole life. And I think in going through the founder journey is when I learned the hard way that if I don't learn how to say no now, I'm never going to be successful, right? Because I think they use this phrase, right? Strap your belt on first, or your oxygen mask, put it on yourself first before you help someone else. And that statement couldn't have been more accurate in the context of boundaries. As a founder in particular, I find myself setting boundaries in my day. So how I do that is at the beginning of my day, it's all about me. It's about setting myself, not answering to anyone else, just taking care of myself, going on a run, going for the gym, just working out, meditating, getting prepared for the rest of my day. And then I make myself available for anything and everything out there to the world. Do you relate to that?
I love that. Yeah, I think it sounds a lot like you prioritize boundaries around your own health and self-care, which is not something I learned how to do for years after starting my company. It really did take me 2 to 3 years before I realized that not only I had the right to have boundaries around, enforcing my own health and self-care needs, but that I actually have to enforce those boundaries. Otherwise, I can't show up as the best version of myself. So that relates and resonates so strongly. I also think that, learning how to draw boundaries with people in your life who they cross a boundary and you only realize that they're crossing a boundary because you start to feel kind of sick to your stomach. You're like, oh, something doesn't feel right here. And like you mentioned, for anyone who struggles with people pleasing, myself included, is, it can be really hard to recognize, oh, this person makes me feel uncomfortable, which means, one, I either need distance from this person or I need to say something.
Yeah.
And one of the lessons that I've had to learn with investors actually is that sometimes people will speak to me in a way that is not aligned with my values.
Yeah.
And sometimes when someone crosses a boundary and I can feel it because I'm upset in my stomach, or I feel really anxious, or I'm afraid, those feelings let me know, okay, I need to draw a boundary here. But it's not always easy or obvious to know what to do when you're in fight or flight and you're anxious. And I know for me, when a friend of mine needs me to stand up for them, no problem. It's easy for me to do.
I'll go to bat.
But when I need to stand up for myself, sometimes that's really hard.
Yeah.
And so one of the really specific tools that I've learned, it's actually a phrase that I've gotten from my mom. And what she says that I've now started using, and it's helped me with boundaries so much, is simply to say, let me stop you right there. Because sometimes when someone in my life says something that's like not aligned or feels really disrespectful,
yeah,
I won't always know what to say immediately in response, but I know that if I can say, let me stop you right there, and know in my head, we're not continuing this conversation until we have a quick conversation about what is okay and what isn't okay. And so I've literally had conversations with people who are, who play a big role in my company, whether they're an investor or an advisor, and being able to say, let me stop you right there. I don't have conversations this way. I do not have conversations where I feel like I'm being disrespected. And I bring that to the table as well. I make sure that I'm always intentional about the way that I communicate and that I'm not, disrespecting the person that I'm speaking to. And so what I've done is in those environments, I'll say, this is my boundary. This is a value that's critical to me. Can we continue this conversation respecting those values, or do we need to end this conversation? That has helped me so much because, again, I don't always know exactly what to say to defend myself. I also don't want to be on the defensive.
Yeah.
And you never know what someone's going to say that you might need to respond to. But if you know that you can pause a conversation, you can assert the values that you've decided on in advance, then you don't actually have to worry about having a comeback or a response for every single thing, because all you have to do is pause the conversation, share your values, and explain that the conversation will only continue if those values can be respected. And so that's a really specific tool that it took me a couple years to learn, but now that I have it, I feel so much more confident walking into any situation that oftentimes involves me and a room full of men, and I know that I'm not going to let them walk all over me, because if someone starts to walk all over me, I will pause and I will be my best advocate and not let them break or ignore the values that direct my life.
So I could not relate to that sentiment anymore, because in college I was probably the only girl in my friend group, and it was with a bunch of guys, and I went through that kind of experience day in, day out. I had to draw my boundaries and really just draw the line. But something that other girls have asked me for advice for, and I'm gonna turn the question to you. I'm curious to hear what you say. How do you separate coming across as maybe passive aggressive, is the term that I've seen a lot of females being associated with, and drawing your boundaries and asserting yourself? How do you distinguish those two? And how can we share that with women today? Yeah,
I think that's a really good question. And I'm not surprised that a lot of people have been asking you that, because it is, I think as women, we are navigating some challenges that are pretty unique to us. We know by now that men can be assertive in a conversation, and we look at it as good leadership. But when a woman is assertive, we might look at it as bossy, for example. And so we know that there are some unique dynamics that we have to adjust to. And I think that being passive aggressive is actually one of the worst ways to solve a problem. And I think the reason why sometimes people resort to being passive aggressive is because we haven't learned how to be direct. And passive aggressive it's aggression, but it's not being direct. And it makes everybody feel sick. It makes the person who's being passive aggressive feel sick. It definitely makes the person on the receiving end feel sick.
Yeah.
And if you've ever received a message that's like, oh, is this passive aggressive? Is this person upset at me? It's really confusing. And I do think it's easier to send a passive aggressive message than it is to stop and say, what do I actually need to communicate with this person? And I think that when you are looking to be direct, the first thing that's so critical, or when you're looking to change behavior in a dynamic, change a dynamic between you and another person, one, you need to be really clear what the actual issue is.
Yeah.
And I think the way that we then communicate about the issue has to be done from a place of love and not from a place of like high ego defensiveness. If we're being defensive and we're trying to be direct, it's going to have a negative impact.
Yeah.
As opposed to if we're trying to be direct, but we're coming from a place of empathy.
Yes.
I think if we go into a situation and let's say we're having a conflict.
Should we get into a fight?
No. No, you win. I give up. White flag. So let's say like we're having a challenge. I think one of the first things that really helps with empathy is deciding that I trust that you have good intentions.
Yeah.
I think that there's this theory, I actually forget what the theory is called, but it's basically this idea that everyone has good intentions. Now, we don't need to like think about, well, what about serial killers? Okay, let's not include serial killers.
Let's scope them out. Let's draw a boundary.
Yeah, we're just gonna say, let's talk like more day-to-day stuff, okay? Not serial killers. But really believing that everyone has a good intent going into a situation. And even if someone does something that like hurts you, they might be coming from a good place, even just to, protect themselves and take care of themselves. And so I don't think people really act to spite other people. I think people act in a way to protect and like help themselves, and not in a negative way. It's like someone might not be responding to you in a way that feels bad because they're like trying to upset you. Maybe they're just hurt and they're coming from a place of not having the skills to know how to communicate their hurt. And so I think one of the most important things when choosing to be direct is to start by saying, I trust that this person has good intentions and that they're not just a villain. And so if this person has good intentions, how can I start a conversation with them about where a boundary is crossed or where I need something to change with that intention, that positive intention in mind, because then you can go into it and it can feel lighthearted. So let's say you made a joke about something and you had no idea that it was something I was sensitive about. I could probably give you the benefit of the doubt and think, well, this is my friend. She's probably not saying something like directly to hurt me. And if she is, it's probably not coming from a place of malice. It's actually probably coming from a place of pain. Yeah. So I can come into this conversation, I can be empathetic, and I can say, hey, I am sure you did not mean to hurt me when you said this, or hey, I'm sure you have only the best intentions in the way that you were communicating, but I just want you to know that I'm actually really sensitive about this topic. Yeah. And so the joke that you made kind of hurt my feelings, and I'm sure you didn't mean anything by it, but I just wanted you to know that that is something that I'm pretty sensitive about. And so in the future, I would love if you could not joke about that kind of thing with me. If I shared something like that, I'm also being vulnerable. I'm being empathetic, but I'm being vulnerable, and I'm owning my part of our dynamic. And being able to own the dynamic and not create like a hero-villain juxtaposition between people, I think is so critical, because maybe maybe there's something that we can bring to the table of vulnerability that actually makes it easier to have this conversation. And I do think that when we're vulnerable with people and we're honest, we're actually going to develop better relationships in the first place. And I think that a conflict that might result in setting boundaries is actually an opportunity to deepen a relationship. Yeah. It does not need to hurt the relationship. It can really improve the relationship.
I 100% agree. In fact, anytime I meet someone new, or honestly, someone I haven't had a conversation with, whether it's new roommates or maybe a friend that I just haven't been direct with, I literally go up to them and I'm like, hey, this might be a little uncomfortable, but I just want you to know a little bit more about me. I feel like I haven't had the chance to share about myself, and I want to learn about you. So then we have the best friendship possible, or we have the best roommate relationship possible, and we could align to everyone's preferences. And when you set a boundary like that, or you set your expectations of how you like to be treated, of how you want to be operated, you're setting yourself up for success. Mm-hmm. Because then if Bailey knows all my boundaries, she will make sure when she's talking to me not to cross them subconsciously. But I set that precedence from the start. What I've seen a lot of my friends go through when they're hey, I'm fighting with my friends, or I'm fighting with my coworkers, whatever it is, right? They haven't set those boundaries from the start. And I'm you can really avoid a lot of conflict just with setting boundaries, and you feel so much more free.
Yeah, totally. And clarifying those values up front, I think, is so meaningful. And I also think that, in our relationships, if we're talking to someone who can't handle having a boundary set, and especially if we're coming to that conversation from a loving, empathetic place, if they can't deal with us drawing a boundary, that might not be a very nurturing relationship for us to be in. And so the boundary that we might have to draw is, instead of constantly putting myself in an environment where I know someone is going to, push some buttons that I'm really sensitive about, then what I can do is not put myself in those environments. And that's another great example of having self-boundaries and knowing, this environment doesn't feel right for me. It doesn't feel aligned. It doesn't feel uplifting. Whenever I leave, I feel a little bit sick to my stomach or totally exhausted, like I have this bad feeling. We can listen to that and we can say to ourselves, okay, I'm gonna draw a boundary for you, and I'm not going to put you in these situations where we know that we kind of feel a little bit out of integrity. And so if someone can't respect a boundary, whether they're a friend, a partner, a colleague, someone that you work with, I think it's really important to be okay with saying, okay, not every relationship has to be for us. And there's this idea that people are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. I know it's a little bit cliche, but I do think it's really a great phrase, because it reminds you that, someone might actually be in your life in a way that helps you learn how to draw boundaries. And that was already a gift, even if this person doesn't necessarily stay in your life. And so if we're learning and we're becoming a better version of ourselves in the process, even if a relationship changes or ends, or is something that we don't invest a lot of time in moving forward, it can still be an absolute gift and something that really helps us become who we're on the planet to be.
And just to add to you too, I've noticed something that I've struggled with in my 20s is I might have known someone for 15 years, but my boundaries have changed over the last 10 years. My boundaries change every year, honestly. And I find myself making my circle closer and closer. And I find myself drawing more boundaries, the more confident I am in myself. So just like a takeaway and almost advice is, you might be friends with someone for 15 years. You might have, I don't know, like an investor or like a relationship or a mentor, like someone who's helping you for a certain period of your life. Like, appreciate that moment and know that not everyone needs to be there in every stage and every moment of every part of your life. And that's not a bad thing. It's honestly a gift, like you're saying, right? You get to appreciate the good times you have with them, and that's just it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there's something that a lot of people experience in the founder journey specifically, where for all the people in their lives who are used to them being a certain way, sometimes the people in our lives will actually be uncomfortable when we start growing or we start pursuing our dreams, because sometimes when we pursue our dreams, other people feel like there's a light being shined on the fact that they're not pursuing their dreams. They're not putting themselves out there. And so sometimes it can make people really uncomfortable, and sometimes their response, even though they love us, is going to be coming from a place of fear, and it might actually end up being passive aggressive. And so being able to notice that someone's coming to us with their fear, and that fear doesn't have to be our fear, is something that can help us understand, hey, maybe I'm not going to go through a friend breakup with this person, but maybe during this phase of my life, what I need is less time spent with them, because I know that maybe their negativity is going to, bring me down or make me doubt myself. And so it's not that we have to end those relationships necessarily, but sometimes knowing, I need some time to pursue this thing and feel free to do so without having to navigate other people's judgment and fear.
And to add to being a founder and setting boundaries, vocalizing that sometimes it's a little thing, like just vocalizing the boundary a bit more of like, hey, I'm really focused on this, and like, this is my focus right now. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. That doesn't mean that I don't want to spend time with you, but just right now, this is what I'm doing, is a nice and easy way to set a boundary with that relationship. And even as a founder, I feel like it's very difficult to set boundaries with your work versus yourself. Like that's something I struggled with. I would stretch myself extremely thin and realize that I often led to burnout.
Yeah.
And that's when I started this whole regime of waking up, doing me, then hanging out with others and like helping anyone else, right? So I just want to emphasize that as a takeaway as well. I'm sure you relate to this.
Oh yeah, I feel like it's a whole other episode. I could just riff on burnout all day long, but I will save it for another one. And I think you're absolutely right that being able to draw those boundaries and enforce your own needs and prioritize them and not see our physical needs as like a nice to have, seeing them as a need to have, and also seeing those needs in our relationships as needs and not just like, oh, well, sure, she makes a lot of like kind of, mean comments to me, but I guess that's okay. No. We have to draw boundaries for ourselves and for like, the kid inside of us who is someone that like there's only one person in the world who's like going to be there for us every day of our lives until our final breath, and that's us.
Yeah.
And so learning how to care for ourselves and stand up for ourselves is totally a journey, but such a critical journey and something that will serve us for our entire lives. And it's not something that we just figure out the answer to and now we've got it, we're like perfect at boundaries. I think that it's something that we have lots of little opportunities to practice.
Yes.
And
it's an everyday thing.
Absolutely.
Right? You're not selfish. You're actually respecting yourself. That's called self-respect, in my opinion. So.
Absolutely. Knowing your values and knowing that, exactly to your point, it's not selfish to enforce your values. It's necessary. And when we start enforcing these boundaries and we start making our values that direct our lives something that we're not waffling on, then we have an opportunity to say, okay, this is how I want to live my life and I'm going to pursue this. Even if I do it imperfectly, that's okay. Because if I'm showing up to these conversations and I'm showing up for myself, from a place of love and empathy, then I'm always going to be moving in the right direction, even if I'm not always perfect.
Yeah. Well, you've ended on the perfect note there. I know we're going way past our 20-minute time limit that we've set for ourselves.
But I guess this is a great opportunity to draw a boundary around this episode.
Wow, we're
that was the lamest joke. Thank you for laughing. That's real friendship. Laughing at the bad jokes. You know how many puns I repress when we're recording?
Oh no.
Hundreds. Hundreds. I just don't want to embarrass you. Yeah.
Keep those on.
Yeah, okay. Keep those on lock. You're like, don't change that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of Start Something. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.